Hello, everyone. Today I've got a really cool theme to talk to you about. We're going to learn about people of the world and their habitats. So we know what people are. We know what the world is, right? Earth, the planet that we live on. So what are habitats? Well, habitats means the places that people or animals live. So some people live in deserts. Some people live in the forest. Some people live in the jungle, right? And all of those people that live in those different areas, or animals that live in those different areas, their lives are very different because of the area that they live in. Some places are more wet, some places are more dry, and that changes the types of clothes that people wear and the houses that they live in. So let's look at some different places around the world and talk about how some places are different. All right, so this is a map of the Earth. Now, it doesn't really look exactly like this, and there's not like a red land and an orange land. This is just a colorful map to show you sort of how we break up the world into some different areas. So usually we say that there are 7 different continents. Continents are like big pieces of land around the world. Over here, this red blobby shape over here is North America. This is where you'll find the United States and Canada and Mexico. Down here, this orange shape, that's South America. That's where you're going to find Peru and Argentina. This green shape right here is Africa. That's where you'll find countries like Namibia and Zambia. This is a big continent right here in the middle of this map. Over here, we have this pink continent over here. This is Australia and New Zealand. Sometimes we call that the Australian continent. And up here, we have, it looks like it should be one piece, but we make it 2 different colors. And over here, this is Europe. And right here, this is Asia. So Europe here is brown and Asia is yellow. Now, there are some scientists who like to call this as one continent because it's not really broken up into 2 pieces. So sometimes people call it Eurasia, like Europe and Asia mixed together. So yeah, Europe and Asia. Now down here in the dark blue, that's Antarctica. Antarctica is the only continent that doesn't have any people who live on it. Now, people might go to Antarctica to visit, and scientists go to Antarctica to do research and do experiments. But nobody lives in Antarctica. There aren't any actual countries in Antarctica. Right? In Europe, we have countries like Germany and England. In Asia, we have Japan, where we live now, and Vietnam. But in Antarctica, there aren't any countries. So now, of course, those different continents are made up of many different countries, and those countries are quite different. Some countries are more, have hotter weather, or some countries have colder weather. So now let's look at some houses that people live in these different areas. All right. The first sort of house that I want to show you, this is called a Pueblo, and a Pueblo can be found in the southwest United States. And if you look around, this is a very dry place. There's not a lot of wood, right? There's not a lot of big forests, lots of trees. So they're not going to make their houses out of trees. This material, these Pueblos, are built out of a material called adobe. And adobe is a type of mud. It's a type of mud mixed with, some grass and plant material, and they make it into these smooth walls, and then the sun dries that mud, and it makes a very nice, strong wall. And the other nice thing about adobe is that the walls are very thick, and so when it's really hot outside in this desert, when it's really hot, it keeps the sunshine and that heat out of your house. That way your house is much cooler inside, even if you don't have any air conditioning. Now, they use a little bit of wood when they build these. If you look at these pillars, these beams at the top for the roofs, they use a little bit of wood, but for the most part, there's not very much wood that is used to build these structures. Now, let me show you another house. This house, whereas the other house, the Pueblo, was in the desert, this house is, obviously in the forest, and it's in a very cold forest, a very snowy forest. Right? Now you can see, if we look at some of the materials, we see bricks down here. We see a lot of wood in the construction. And that makes sense because if you look around them in the forest, there's lots of trees. So that means there's a lot of wood, a lot of natural materials around them that they can use to build their houses. Now look at the shape of this house. It's a big triangle. The reason for that is because snow is very heavy, actually. And if a lot of snow builds up on your house, eventually your roof would get so heavy that it might break, and that would be pretty bad for you if you were inside. So houses that are built in very snowy places usually have sort of a triangular roof. And that way, when the snow collects, the snow will just fall down the sides and collect down at the bottom. If we look at the Pueblo one more time, we can see this would not be very good, not a very good design for a snowy place, because these roofs are all flat, and so they would collect a lot of snow. So we can see the shape and the materials are quite different depending on where you live. Here's another really cool house. This is called a turf house, and this is from Iceland. And you can see turf is sort of a fancy word for grass, right? And so we can see lots of grass on the ground. And then we can see grass that has been planted over the top of the house. So the roof of this house is made out of grass or turf. And that's why it's called a turf house. It's a really beautiful house. I think it looks really, really nice with this red and the green. It's very, very pretty. You can see they have a little chimney here sticking up out of the top for a fireplace inside. And this is a material that they have around them. Look at all that grass around them. So the grasses grow very nicely in this area, this part of the world. And so it's very easy for them to grow that grass over their house. And grass is also a very nice material for controlling temperature. So if it's cold outside or hot outside, you can make the inside of your house like a normal temperature, because the grass helps keep the cold away or the heat away. So yeah, that's a very nice material to build with too. And I think it looks really, really pretty on that house. Now, not everybody stays in the same place all the time. This is a house called a yurt that you can find in some different countries like Mongolia. And this is a house, and maybe it's a big house actually. A lot of times, maybe even several families might live in there together. But actually, this house is kind of like a tent. It can be packed up and put away and moved someplace else. So if they have, some animals and their animals are grazing here, which means, they're eating the grass here. Maybe they run out of grass in this area and the animals need to move to a place with more grass or more plants. Well, they can pack up their house and they can take it with them to go someplace else, or maybe someplace warmer, someplace cooler. They can move their house anywhere they need to. Now, it's pretty heavy and it would be a lot of work to move this house, but you can move it. Another temporary type of house, so temporary means like not a place that you stay all the time, is an igloo. And an igloo is a house that's made out of ice. Now, people don't live in an igloo all year round. But the people who use these, they have a village that they live in with their family and their friends. And then sometimes they need to leave their village to go hunting for food. Right? And when they go out hunting for food, they don't want to carry very much stuff with them. They don't want to carry a big tent and a lot of different supplies because it's very cold. They have to walk through the snow. So they want to bring only a little bit of stuff, right? So they learned how to make a house, to make like a tent kind of, out of snow and ice. And you might think, wow, that sounds really cold, right? If your house was made out of ice. But actually, compared to outside, the outside might be really, really cold. The inside will definitely be warmer than the outside. The snow actually helps keep some warmth inside this igloo. So it's much nicer to be inside than outside. But of course, they have to use the materials around them, because if you look, there aren't any trees, there's no bushes, there's no mud. But what do they have? They have lots of snow and lots of ice. So that's what they can use to build these. All right, that brings us to our last picture. Now, I don't know where this picture's from. I don't know what country this is. I don't know whose house it is. I don't even know what continent this house is from. But we can use some of our sort of like a detective skills that we learned by looking at those other pictures to try and guess what kind of a place this is, just by looking at the house that these people live in. So let's look at some of the things, like some of these materials, and then let's look at the roof. Let's look at this door. Look at the walls. Look at this material that they're using to build. The whole house is lifted up off the ground on these stilts down at the bottom. So let's think. What do you think you can tell about this place from this house? Do you think it's a hot country or a cold country? I think it's probably a warm country, probably very warm, because this roof doesn't look like it would be very strong against snow. So I don't think they get much snow, or maybe any snow at this place. And also, if I look at the door has lots of holes in it. And those holes might be good for letting air in. But if this was a cold place, I think it would let a lot of cold air in, and that would be very uncomfortable to be inside. So I think this must be a very warm or very hot place. Why do you think they've raised the whole house up off the ground? I think the reason they've raised this house up off the ground is because there must be a lot of water that comes here sometimes. So maybe it's dry right now. You can see it's dry and dusty on the ground. But maybe they have like a big storm season, like a typhoon season, where big storms come and a lot of rain and water, and then maybe the ground floods a little bit, which means the ground gets covered with a little bit of water. If their houses were flat on the ground, that means their beds might get wet, right? And all their stuff might get wet and ruined. So if they lift their house up off the ground, then that means if water comes, the water will go under their house and all of their stuff will be safe. So I think, even though I don't know exactly where this house is from, I don't know exactly whose house it is, I think we can tell a little bit about these people by looking at their house. We can tell it's probably a hot habitat. It's probably a wet habitat sometimes, at least. Right? Here it's dry in this picture, but there must be other times where it's wet, I think. And we can also see some of the materials that they have around them. They've used a lot of different natural materials like wood for these beams, and different types of maybe grasses or palm tree leaves for the roof. So we can see this must be some of the materials that they use, that they have around this area, that they can collect to build these houses. Pretty interesting. All right, so now what I want you to do is I want you to start thinking about your own neighborhood. Think about the house that you live in. Look around your neighborhood and see the houses that are around you, right? In Tokyo, there's a lot of apartment buildings, right? And some houses too. But I think most people live in apartment buildings here, right? Why is that? Why does Tokyo have houses that are so tall? I want you to try and think about that answer to that question. Look around your neighborhood and see, what kind of materials do we build with? What is our climate like? Is it hot in Tokyo? Is it cold in Tokyo? Is it both? Maybe it can be hot and cold in Tokyo. So I want you to start thinking about the houses in our city and try and imagine, why is it that we build our houses this way, in this shape, or from these materials? All right. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.